My heart stopped for 3 minutes, but while I was literally clawing my way back to life, my mother, Lori, called to tell me that Shannon's birthday cake was more important than my drama. 24 hours later, they were in handcuffs, begging the daughter they abandoned to save their souls. The darkness had been absolute, a cold, heavy vacuum where I was no longer a daughter, a professional, or even a person. I was just a ghost drifting in a sea of anesthesia, until the first mechanical rhythm began to pull me violently back to the surface. The first thing I heard wasn't a human voice. It was the rhythmic, clinical beep of the heart monitor, a metronome keeping time with a life I almost lost. My eyes flickered open, but the ceiling of the Northwestern Memorial ICU was a blurry, sterile white that made my head swim. Every breath felt like a heavy stone sitting on my chest, a constant reminder of the 8-hour battle the surgeons had just fought inside my ribcage. Chicago was having one of those early winters. I could hear the wind howling outside, rattling the heavy hospital glass as if it were trying to get in. The scent of antiseptic was so thick I could taste it on the back of my tongue. I lay there, Sierra, a woman with a new heart and an old soul, realizing how quiet the world becomes when you're standing on the edge of it. They say we are given 2 lives, and the second one truly begins the moment we realize we only have one. I looked at the IV lines snaking out of my arm, feeling the physical weight of the incision that ran down my sternum. It was a jagged seam holding me together. I reached out a trembling hand for my phone, my fingers fumbling with the screen. I was looking for a sign, a text, a missed call, anything to prove I wasn't alone in this cold, white void. Instead, I found an execution. My social media feed was vibrant, glowing with the high-definition joy of Shannon's birthday gala. There was my mother, Lori, radiant in silk, and my sister Shannon, laughing beneath a chandelier as if the world were made of sugar and gold. They hadn't forgotten me. They had simply moved on without me. I stared at a photo of them clinking champagne glasses, realizing that while I was being cut open to stay alive, they were celebrating a life that no longer had room for my name. I hadn't just been left behind. I had been erased from the family portrait. The phone in my hand suddenly vibrated, the sensation jarring against my sensitive nerves. It was Lori. For a fleeting, foolish second, my heart, the new, fragile one, swelled with hope. I answered, my voice a dry, sandpaper rasp. "Mom?" I whispered. There was no, "How are you?" or, "Thank God you're awake." There was only a sharp staccato demand that cut through the quiet of the ICU like a blade. "Sierra, finally! Where is the red velvet cake? The baker says it was never picked up and Shannon is inconsolable. You were supposed to handle this." I closed my eyes, a single tear slipping past the bridge of my nose. "Mom, I just had heart surgery," I managed to choke out. "I'm in the ICU." The silence on the other end lasted only a heartbeat before Lori's voice returned, even colder than the wind outside. "Stop your selfish drama, Sierra. A little procedure is just an excuse to avoid your responsibilities. You've always tried to steal the spotlight from Shannon with your emergencies. Her party matters more than your attention-seeking. Get someone to deliver that cake or don't bother coming home." I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I remembered my grandmother once told me that character is how you treat those who can do nothing for you. My family had just shown me exactly who they were. I hung up the phone, the rejection stinging worse than the surgical wounds. In that moment of profound clarity, I realized that blood makes you related, but loyalty and respect are what make you family. My blood had just forfeited their right to my heart. I realized then that sometimes, the hardest part of surviving isn't the surgery itself. It's deciding who gets to stay in your life after you wake up. But as I sat there, the forensic accountant in me, the woman who spent her life finding the lies hidden in columns of numbers, began to stir. A notification blinked at the top of my screen, DocuSign. It was an automated alert for a 2025 tax amendment pending my signature. My blood ran cold. I hadn't authored any tax amendments. I wasn't even supposed to be working. I realized then that the frantic calls about a cake weren't about Shannon's happiness at all. They needed me at that party because they needed my physical presence and my signature, while I was still high on post-op morphine. I wasn't an unfilial daughter. I was a professional being hunted by her own kin. I realized they weren't waiting for me to get better. They were waiting for me to be weak enough to sign my own life away. I felt a shift in my spirit, a cold, hard resolve that replaced the pain in my chest. If they wanted a forensic accountant, I would give them one. I would protect the truth, and more importantly, I would protect myself. As the heavy door to my ICU room creaked open, a long shadow stretched across the floor toward my bed, but the footsteps were too heavy to be a doctor's. It lingered, a heavy, distorted silhouette cast by the hallway lights. I held my breath, the fresh incision in my chest thumping with a dull, rhythmic ache. But the intruder wasn't a person. As the heavy door groaned on its hinges, the light shifted, revealing it was merely the blue glow of my tablet reflecting off the glass partition. My mind was playing tricks on me, a byproduct of the morphine and the deep-seated fear that my family was already circling like vultures. I exhaled, a shaky, thin sound in the sterile silence. I reached for the tablet, my fingers numb and clumsy. A notification was blinking, a tag on a social media post. I opened it, and the world seemed to tilt. Shannon was live streaming from her gala. She stood in the center of a gilded ballroom, a single, perfect tear tracking down her cheek. "It's so hard," she sobbed to her thousands of followers, her voice amplified by the phone's microphone. "Sierra is faking another medical emergency just to ruin my special night. She's always been so desperate for attention. Please, pray for her soul, even if she won't be here for her family." The comments section was a Shark Tank. "How selfish can one sister be?" one read. "Disgusting behavior," said another. I watched my own sister execute my reputation in real time, using public shaming as a leash to pull me back into submission. It was a digital lynching, orchestrated by the person who used to share my childhood bed. I remembered a line from an old book. "What others think of you is none of your business." I repeated it like a mantra. My silence wasn't weakness. It was the only dignity they couldn't reach their hands in and steal. I didn't cry. Instead, I began meticulously taking screenshots. In the eyes of the law, this wasn't just family drama. It was evidence of malicious intent and public defamation. Have you ever had to watch someone lie about you to a crowd of strangers? It's a specific kind of coldness that settles in your bones. I realized then that Shannon wasn't just mean. She was calculating. She was preparing the world to take her side when the real blow landed. A soft knock at the door made me flinch. This time, the shadow was real. The door pushed open slowly, and Arthur, the hospital security guard, stepped in. He wasn't supposed to be here, but I recognized him from the countless nights I'd spent in the hospital's business wing, auditing records until the sun came up. He held a small, steaming cup of broth. "I saw the light on, Sierra," he said softly, his voice a gravelly comfort. "And I saw those people shouting in the lobby earlier. I figured you could use a friend who doesn't want anything from you." Arthur sat in the plastic chair, telling me a story about his own daughter and how they had rebuilt their lives after a bitter storm. It was a moment of pure, selfless kindness that felt like a lifeline. He didn't ask about my surgery or my money. He just sat with me in the dark. I felt a surge of gratitude so sharp it hurt. Blood makes you related, but loyalty and respect make you family. Arthur was more of a father in those 10 minutes than Haddon had been in 30 years. I realized I wasn't bitter. I was just finally becoming discerning. Once Arthur left, A new resolve took hold. I used the hospital's secure Wi-Fi to bypass the DocuSign alert and dived straight into the family's private cloud server. My fingers moved with the muscle memory of a forensic accountant. I found it tucked away in a hidden directory, the 2025 tax amendment draft. My heart hammered against my ribs as I read the fine print. Haddon and Shannon had pre-filled my name as the responsible party for a $2.4 million tax discrepancy. The legal trap was genius in its cruelty. They didn't just want me at the party for a cake. They wanted my biometric signature on that tablet or my ink on a physical card. Lori's oversized birthday card was a Trojan horse. If I signed it while dazed on morphine, I'd be signing a confession or a power of attorney kept beneath the cardstock. They were trying to bury their fraud in my grave. I stared at the numbers, the cold logic of the crime settling over me like a shroud. I stayed awake, the blue light of the tablet the only sun in my world. I wasn't just a patient anymore. I was a whistleblower in a hospital gown. I meticulously mapped the digital trail, documenting every forged entry and every unauthorized access attempt. The pain in my chest was still there, but it was secondary to the fire in my mind. Looking back now, I should have seen it coming. I had been their safety net for so long that they forgot I was a person who could feel the fall. The quiet of the pre-dawn hour was shattered by a sharp ding from my phone. A message from Lori appeared on the lock screen. It was short, blunt, and devoid of any motherly warmth. I'm downstairs in the lobby. I have the card, and Haddon is with me. Don't you dare think about closing your door or telling the nurses to keep us out. We are coming up now. I looked at the door, then back at my tablet. The battle for my life was over, but the battle for my soul was just beginning. The digital hum of my phone felt like a death rattle against the plastic hospital tray. Lori's message was a declaration of war disguised as a family visit. I watched the heavy ICU door, feeling the phantom pressure of the surgical tape across my chest, knowing that the only thing protecting me was a pane of reinforced glass and my own willingness to say no. I hadn't even been awake for a full day, and already the vultures were circling, their wings heavy with the scent of a social scandal they desperately needed to bury. Have you ever noticed how the people who demand the most loyalty are usually the ones who have earned it the least? The door didn't just open, it was shoved, a sharp intrusion into my fragile sanctuary. Lori didn't enter with the softness of a mother visiting a recuperating daughter. She marched in, her heels clicking a rhythmic, aggressive beat on the linoleum, her face a mask of forced, saccharine concern that didn't reach her eyes. She wasn't carrying flowers or a change of clothes. In her hands was a massive, neon-bright birthday card, its edges slightly frayed as if it had been clutched too tightly in a moment of panic. "Sierra, honey," she cooed, the sweetness of her tone clashing violently with the sharp antiseptic air. "You look so pale, but we simply have to get this done. Shannon is devastated that you're missing her big day." I watched her with a clinical detachment I hadn't known I possessed. My mind was a forensic vault, sorting through her gestures and her words like suspicious line items in a ledger. Lori didn't ask about my vitals. She didn't look at the heart monitor that was currently spiking. She simply placed the card on my bedside table, right next to the morphine drip. "Family peace is a woman's greatest achievement, Sierra," she whispered, leaning in so close I could smell her expensive perfume. "By staying here and refusing to sign this, you're killing Shannon's spirit. You're being so selfish. Is this how I raised you?" It was a classic move, the kind of emotional arson designed to make me feel responsible for a fire they had started. I remembered a hard truth I'd picked up during my years in the corporate trenches. You cannot find peace in the same place you lost it. I took a slow, shallow breath, feeling the pull of the stitches. "It's a very bright card, Mom," I said, my voice steady despite the sandpaper grit in my throat. "Tell me about it. Did Shannon pick it out herself, or was it a group effort?" I wasn't being friendly. I was maintaining a tactical distance. I needed to see how far she would go to maintain the illusion. Honesty is a very expensive gift, and I knew better than to expect it from people who lived their lives behind filters and lies. Lori's smile faltered, just for a second, a crack appearing in her porcelain mask. Everyone signed it, Sierra. Even the caterers. It's a family tradition. Just put your name right here at the bottom. She pushed the card closer, her fingers trembling with a frantic energy. That was when my forensic eye caught it. The subtle, unnatural stiffness of the cardstock. It was too heavy, too thick for a simple greeting. As Lori fumbled with the fold, a tiny sliver of a different paper grade, a crisp white bond paper, peeked through the crease. My heart hammered. This wasn't a card. It was a Trojan horse. The oversized card was a physical diversion, a paper shield designed to hide a 2025 tax amendment and a power of attorney document. They wanted my signature while my brain was still foggy from the anesthesia and the morphine. They wanted me to sign my own legal death warrant while I was too weak to read the fine print. Lori reached out, her hand attempting to physically guide my own toward the card, a clear violation of every medical and ethical boundary in the book. I felt a surge of cold, sharp clarity. No, I said, retracting my hand with a slow, deliberate movement. Quiet power isn't about shouting. It's about the immovable strength of a boundary. Sierra, don't be difficult, Lori hissed, the mask finally slipping to reveal the jagged edges of her frustration. Just sign the damn card so we can move on. I looked her directly in the eye, seeing the desperation of a woman who valued a social script more than her own child's heartbeat. Mom, according to the Uniform Commercial Code and every contract law in this country, a signature obtained while a person is under the influence of narcotics is legally void. It's fraud, and attempting to obtain one in a hospital is a felony. The air in the room seemed to freeze. Lori's face turned a mottled red, the artificial sweetness replaced by a raw, unadulterated fury. I spoke again, this time with a voice of genuine, sorrowful compassion. I wish the family was as happy as this card claims we are, Mom. I truly do. But I will not participate in a lie that threatens my freedom. I'm Sierra, not a sacrificial lamb for Shannon's shopping habits. Lori let out a sound that was half laugh, half growl. You think you're so smart, don't you? With your numbers and your laws. We are your family. We made you. I didn't respond with anger. I simply looked at my tablet, where I had secretly activated the recording function minutes ago. Lori's admission that the family's survival depends on this signature was now a digital file, a permanent record of their intent. Get out, Lori, I said, using her name for the first time in my life. The shift in power was instantaneous. The little girl, who always did what she was told, was gone, replaced by a woman who knew exactly what she was worth. Lori snatched the card off the table, her eyes darting toward the nurse's station as if she expected the police to burst in. You'll regret this, she spat, her voice a low, venomous promise. When you're all alone and have nothing left, don't you dare come crawling back to us. I smiled, a small, sad movement of my lips. I was alone the moment I woke up in this room, Mom. I'm just finally comfortable with it. As she stormed out, the heavy ICU door swinging shut with a final hollow thud, I leaned back against the thin hospital pillows. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold, analytical dread. If they were this desperate, if they were willing to risk a felony charge just to get my signature in the middle of the night, then the emergency exit I had found on the cloud server was more than just a secret folder. It was a ticking time bomb, and the fuse was shorter than I had imagined. I looked at the heart monitor, watching the green line dance in a steady, determined rhythm. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was preparing to fight. I exhaled a breath I didn't know I was holding, the effort causing a sharp, stinging pull against my surgical dressing. My fingers, still trembling slightly from the confrontation, were already flying across the hospital tablet's touchscreen. There was no time for tears or the luxury of a breakdown. In the world of high-stakes finance, The first one to the evidence survives. The second one becomes the fall guy. I wasn't going to be anyone's sacrificial lamb, not tonight, and not ever again. I navigated the encrypted cloud server of the family estate with a cold, practiced efficiency. My forensic credentials acted as a digital skeleton key, slipping through layers of security that Shannon likely thought were impenetrable. I bypassed the decoy folders filled with mundane business receipts and seasonal vacation photos until I found it. A hidden directory buried deep within a system library, cryptically labeled Emergency Exit. The irony wasn't lost on me. While I was struggling to find an exit from a life-threatening heart condition, they were building an exit from their own criminal liabilities using my name as the door. Inside that folder, I found the digital grave they had dug for me. It was a meticulously organized series of wire transfers totaling $3.2 million. The funds hadn't come from a business account. They had been siphoned directly from my personal trust. The money my grandfather had left specifically for my future. The destination was an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, and the authorization was a digital signature forged at 7:45 a.m. on the day of my surgery, while I was being prepped for the theater. Sierra, the reliable one. Sierra, the quiet one. They hadn't just been throwing a party. Shannon was laundering the final remains of my life savings to cover a fraudulent shopping spree and a mountain of undisclosed debt. I paused, the blue light of the tablet reflecting in my eyes like a cold, digital ghost. I felt a hollow ache in my chest that had nothing to do with my surgery. I remembered my father's voice from years ago, telling me that family covers for each other. I finally understood their vocabulary. In this house, cover meant sacrifice the youngest. It meant I was the insurance policy for their greed. Loyalty to a lie is a betrayal of the truth, and I realized that my silence wouldn't just be an act of endurance. It would be an act of complicity in my own destruction. I was looking at the evidence of a theft that reached far beyond money. They had tried to steal my right to exist as anything other than a safety net. In that moment of crushing clarity, I thought of the employees at our family firm. I knew the ledgers. I knew Shannon had been dipping into the pension funds to maintain the illusion of the Gold Coast lifestyle. If I didn't act, dozens of families, people who had worked for my father for 30 years, would lose everything. My no to my mother tonight wasn't just about me. It was a yes to the survival of people who actually deserved a future. Compassion isn't always a soft word. Sometimes it's a hard, legal line drawn in the sand. I wasn't being a drama queen. I was being a witness. My hands remained steady as I composed an email to a contact I'd made during my last audit, a senior agent at the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. I didn't use emotional language. I let the data speak. I attached the emergency exit logs, the DocuSign forgery alerts, and the screenshots of Shannon's live stream where she claimed I was faking my condition. It was a complete package of intent, means, and opportunity. I knew the U.S. legal system. Once a whistleblower report of this magnitude is filed under the Dodd-Frank Act, the machinery of the state becomes an unstoppable force. There would be no talking this through over Sunday brunch. At precisely 2:24 a.m., exactly 24 hours after I first opened my eyes in this ICU, I hovered my finger over the send icon. Looking back now, I should have seen the betrayal coming years ago, but we often go blind to the things we aren't ready to lose. I wasn't losing a family tonight. I was losing a set of chains I had mistaken for roots. I hit send. The digital whoosh of the outgoing mail sounded like the first real breath of air I'd taken in decades. I didn't feel the rush of revenge I had expected. I only felt a profound, heavy sense of reality. The truth is a heavy thing to carry, but it's lighter than a lie. A cinematic cut occurred in my mind. While my ICU room remained a fortress of fluorescent silence, 10 miles away at the Gold Coast penthouse, the gala was reaching its crescendo. I could almost hear the clinking of crystal and the hollow laughter of people who thought they were untouchable. They were dancing on a floor that I had just pulled out from under them. They didn't know that as the email hit the federal server, the automated freeze orders were already being dispatched to the central banks. The music was still playing, but the lights were already out. They just hadn't noticed the darkness yet. I closed the tablet and leaned back, resting my head against the thin hospital pillows. My heart monitor, which had been erratic since Lori entered, began to steady. The green line traced a calm, determined rhythm on the screen, a new pulse for a new life. I hadn't chosen to hurt them. I had chosen to stop hurting myself. I realized that some bridges aren't meant to be crossed. They are meant to be burned so that you can't be followed. I wasn't the selfish one. I was the one who survived the fire. The stillness of the room was suddenly shattered by the hospital's landline phone on my bedside table. It rang with a persistence that felt like a physical blow. I stared at it for 3 rings before I picked up. The voice on the other end was Shannon's, but the polished, perfect tone was gone. She sounded like a cornered animal, raw and panicked. Sierra, wake up. The accounts. Everything is locked. My cards were declined in front of everyone. Hadden tried the corporate line and it's flagged for investigation. What did you do? You fix this right now. You're the only one with the override codes. I didn't say a word. I simply listened to the sound of a world falling apart, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to catch the pieces. The panicked scream of my sister over the landline hadn't even faded before the reality of her terror manifested in the hallway. I didn't just hear them coming. I felt the vibration of their desperation through the floorboards. The heavy ICU door, the only thing standing between my recovery and their ruin, was suddenly thrown wide. It didn't groan this time. It slammed against the rubber stopper with a violence that made the heart monitor beside me let out a frantic, high-pitched warning. Lori and Hadden didn't walk in. They erupted into the room, bypassing the restricted access signs and the wide-eyed nurse at the station as if the rules of a hospital, or of basic human decency, no longer applied to them. They brought a whirlwind of chaos into the sterile, quiet room. Their faces weren't pale with worry for my health. They were flushed with the ugly adrenaline of financial collapse. Lori's expensive coat was disheveled, and Hadden's tie was loosened, making him look like a man who had been running from a ghost. They didn't see the tubes snaking into my arms, or the way I winced as the air from their entrance hit my chest. They only saw the woman who had dared to lock the vault. Lori didn't even say hello. She marched to the bedside and slammed that oversized birthday card directly onto my chest, the heavy cardstock landing right over my surgical site. I gasped, a hot flash of pain radiating from the incision, but she didn't flinch. "Fix it, Sierra," she shrieked, her voice echoing off the white walls. "The FBI is at the penthouse. Shannon's accounts are frozen. They're asking questions about emergency exit folders. You do your voodoo with the computer and you unfreeze them right now." I looked up at her, my vision blurring for a second from the physical shock. It was a profound violation, a moment where the sanctuary of a hospital bed was turned into a battlefield. I realized then that toxic love is a predatory thing. Some people will burn your whole house down just to keep themselves warm for one night. And Lori was currently holding the match. She didn't see a daughter who had almost died 24 hours ago. She saw a broken tool that was refusing to work. I haven't been forgotten. I've been erased by their need for survival. Hadden stepped forward, his shadow looming over me. He didn't try to soften Lori's blow. Instead, he attempted a desperate, legalistic, parental reverse Uno. "Listen to me, Sierra," he growled, his voice a low, threatening rumble. "We know what you did. We know you sent those emails. That's professional negligence. You were our fiduciary, and you tricked us into these discrepancies just to frame us. We'll sue you for everything you have left. We'll make sure you never work as an accountant in this country again." It was a bold lie, a desperate attempt to gaslight a woman who had the receipts saved in 3 different cloud servers. Lori leaned in closer, her eyes glittering with a new, sharper malice. "And don't think you can hide behind that gown," she hissed. "I've already called the tabloids. If those accounts aren't opened by dawn, the story goes out. Sierra Martin, the mentally unstable daughter who embezzled millions for elective surgery. We'll tell them you're an addict, that you've been hallucinating this whole fraud because of the meds. Who do you think the world is going to believe? The successful parents or the girl hiding in an ICU?" I remained stoic, my knuckles whitening as I gripped the bed rail to keep from shaking. The truth doesn't cost anything, but a lie. A lie like that will cost you everything you have. I felt a cold, hard armor settling over my spirit. "I am a whistleblower under federal protection, Lori," I said, my voice like ice cutting through her heat. "And Haddon, as a lawyer, you should know that harassing a patient in an intensive care unit to obstruct a federal investigation is a felony in the state of Illinois. You aren't just losing your money tonight. You're losing your freedom. Every word you say in this room is being recorded by the hospital's security monitors." The silence that followed was heavy, filled only with the rhythmic beep, beep, beep of my heart monitor, which was now racing. Lori's face contorted, the matriarchal mask finally shattering into 1,000 jagged pieces. She reached out, her hand grabbing my wrist with a strength that made me wince, trying to force my thumb onto the biometric scanner of the tablet I had been using. It was a desperate act of physical coercion. A mother trying to hijack her daughter's identity to save a shopping budget. I looked at her, and for the first time I didn't feel fear. I felt a deep, sorrowful pity. How small must your soul be to value a penthouse over your own child's heartbeat? I didn't fight her physically. I didn't have the strength. Instead, I moved my other hand and pressed the red nurse's emergency call button with a slow, deliberate click. "I forgive you, Lori," I whispered, watching her eyes widen as the alarm began to blare in the hallway. "I forgive you not because you deserve it, or because you've changed. I forgive you because I deserve peace, and I can't carry the weight of your hate into my new life." The room was suddenly flooded with hospital security and nursing staff. Arthur was the first through the door, his face a mask of professional fury as he saw Lori hovering over me. "Get back," he commanded, his hand moving toward his belt. Lori and Haddon were swarmed, their protests echoing loudly as they were hauled toward the exit. They looked small now, stripped of the veneer of Gold Coast prestige, just 2 desperate people being escorted out like common trespassers. As they were dragged past the threshold, Lori twisted her head back, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated venom. She screamed one last thing over her shoulder, a sentence that felt like a grenade tossed into the room. "You think you're so innocent, Sierra? You think you're the hero of this story? Ask your father where the money for your surgery really came from. Ask him whose life we really traded for yours." The door slammed shut, and the silence that followed was deafening. I lay there, my chest heaving, the quiet power I had worked so hard to build suddenly feeling very fragile. I looked at the heart monitor, watching the lines spike and dip. Looking back now, I should have seen that there was one final secret hidden in the dark. I didn't realize it then, but the storm hadn't ended. It had just changed direction. I sat in the dim light of the ICU, the words, "Ask your father," echoing in my head like a curse. The clinical silence of the ICU felt heavy, saturated with the poison Lori had left behind. Her scream about the real source of my surgery money didn't just fade. It hung in the air like a toxic mist, forcing me to face the one thing I hadn't audited, the cost of my own survival. I lay there, Sierra, a woman with a mended heart that now felt like it was being squeezed by an invisible hand. I reached for the hospital tablet, my fingers numb as I navigated the billing portal. I had assumed my insurance and the trust fund escrow I'd managed for years had covered everything. I was wrong. Looking back now, I should have seen that in a family of predators, Even life-saving care comes with a hidden receipt. I stared at the screen, my forensic eyes scanning the ledger until they hit a massive, external payment notification. The balance in my medical escrow account, the one I had diligently funded from my own salary for 5 years, was nearly zero. The insurance claim for the surgery had been denied weeks ago due to non-payment of premiums. I had set up autopay. I knew the dates. But as I dug deeper into the transaction logs, I saw the truth. The autopay had been manually disabled from Haddon's administrative terminal. My survival fund had been treated like a slush fund. When those who should be your shelter become the storm, you learn to build a roof out of your own skin. A shadow flickered at the door. Not the aggressive burst of Lori, but a hesitant, ghost-like movement. Haddon slipped into the room, looking like a man who had been hollowed out by his own choices. His polished lawyer's suit was wrinkled, and his eyes wouldn't meet mine. He wasn't here to apologize. I could tell by the way he clutched a leather portfolio. He was here to make a deal before the federal indictments became a permanent part of his biography. He sat in the chair Arthur had occupied, but he looked like a trespasser in my life. "Sierra," he began, his voice a thin, reedy version of the booming authority I remembered from childhood. "Things have gotten out of hand. Shannon's gala. It was supposed to be a relaunch for the firm. We needed the optics." I didn't let him finish. I didn't need a lawyer's spin. I needed the forensic truth. "Where is my insurance money, Dad?" I asked, my voice flat, devoid of the daughterly warmth he usually exploited. "And why is my medical escrow empty?" I watched him flinch, a tiny, satisfying fracture in his practiced composure. The confession that followed was bitter, a jagged pill that neither of us could swallow easily. Under my cold, calculated questioning, Haddon admitted the unthinkable. They had drained my medical insurance fund and the heart surgery escrow to pay for Shannon's birthday extravaganza and to cover his own spiraling gambling debts at the private clubs. "We thought you'd get better anyway," he whispered, a sentence so monstrous it made the heart monitor skip a beat. "And Shannon's reputation was at stake. We thought we'd have the money back before the hospital billed us." They had literally gambled with my life for a social event and a hand of cards. I looked at him and felt a strange, chilling sense of pity. It wasn't the kind of pity that leads to forgiveness. It was the kind you feel for a broken machine that can no longer be fixed. The most dangerous thing in the world is a parent who believes their child is a resource to be harvested rather than a human being to be loved. "You didn't just steal my money, Haddon," I said, the weight of the realization settling into my bones. "You decided my heartbeat was an acceptable price for a party." He reached out a hand, perhaps hoping for a moment of grace, but I shifted my weight, putting the plastic railing of the bed between us, a physical border for a spiritual divide. The door groaned again, and Lori returned, clutching that oversized card like a weapon. She hadn't heard our conversation, or perhaps she simply didn't care. She was still obsessed with the correction affidavit hidden beneath the cardstock. "Sierra, enough of this. Sign the card. Shannon is crying in the lobby. The FBI won't leave. Just give us the authorization so we can fix this mess." She thrust the card toward me, but I didn't even look at the signature line. I looked at the card as if it were a piece of trash that had blown in from the street. I looked Lori directly in the eye, and for the first time, the quiet power I had been cultivating felt like an unbreakable shield. "You don't need my signature on a card, Lori," I said, my voice resonating with a clarity that silenced her mid-breath. "You need my heartbeat to cover your lies. You need me to be the ghost that haunts your bank accounts so you don't have to face the cold." But this heart died for 3 minutes on that table. When it came back, it didn't recognize your voice. It doesn't belong to you anymore. I saw the shock register on her face, the realization that the useful daughter had finally become the independent woman. Without breaking eye contact, I reached out and pressed the code gray button on my bedside console. It was the call for hospital security and a social worker. "I am revoking your medical next of kin status," I told them, the words feeling like the final seal on a long overdue divorce. "You are now personae non gratae in this room and in my life. I have already contacted the hospital's legal department. If you step foot on this floor again, you will be arrested for trespassing and witness intimidation." Lori's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked at Haddon, but he was already looking at the floor, knowing the game was over. As the security team arrived to escort them out, the room felt lighter, the air finally clearing of the toxic weight they carried. I lay back, feeling the steady throb of my pulse. A pulse that I now knew I had paid for with everything I owned. I didn't realize it then, but that moment of total isolation was the most honest I had ever been with myself. I was Sierra. I was a survivor, and I was finally truly alone. And for the first time, that didn't feel like a tragedy. It felt like a foundation. The pre-dawn light began to spill over Lake Michigan, painting the Chicago skyline in shades of bruised purple and gold. A nurse I hadn't seen before entered the room, her footsteps soft. She didn't have a needle or a blood pressure cuff. She held a folder of discharge papers and a small, sympathetic smile. "The doctor cleared you for an early release," she said quietly. "He thinks you'll heal better somewhere." Peaceful. But as she set the folder down, my phone on the table let out a final cryptic ping. It was a digital notification from Haddon's personal laptop, a file he had accidentally synced to the cloud in his panic. My fingers hovered over the screen. As I clicked open that final file from Haddon's laptop, I felt the last jagged piece of my history lock into place. It was a life insurance policy taken out on me, hidden under a shell company, with Shannon as the sole beneficiary. They hadn't just gambled with my surgery money, they had been betting on my death. I sat there, Sierra, a woman who had survived not just a failing heart, but a family that viewed my expiration as a payday. I closed the screen with a steady hand. The shock was gone, replaced by a quiet, crystalline dignity. Closure isn't something they give you. It's something you take for yourself by walking away with your soul intact. The morning air of Chicago was crisp, carrying the scent of lake water and change as Arthur pushed my wheelchair toward the hospital's revolving glass doors. My discharge papers were held firmly in my lap, a heavy stack of documents that felt like a diploma from the hardest school I'd ever attended. I haven't been forgotten. I have been liberated. As the doors rotated, the city noise rushed in, the hum of early traffic, the distant sirens, but it felt like music now. I wasn't the girl who apologized for existing anymore. I was a woman who had heard the silence of the void and decided to speak back. Across Michigan Avenue, the morning stillness was shattered by the rhythmic flash of blue and red lights. Federal vehicles were parked in front of the Gold Coast entrance, a spectacle that drew the eyes of early commuters. I watched as Shannon, still wearing the disheveled, glittery remains of her gala dress, was led out by FBI agents. Her wrists were cuffed, her face a mask of panicked disbelief. Haddon followed, his head bowed, his rights being read to him in that flat, bureaucratic tone that marks the end of a legacy. I felt a strange, detached pity for them. Some people are so poor, all they have is money. And now they didn't even have that. I resisted the urge to gloat or roll down the window to witness their shame. My revenge was simply allowing the truth to exist without my protection. I didn't realize it then, but the most powerful thing I could do was nothing at all. I turned my eyes away from the fallen penthouse and looked at the horizon where the sun was beginning to burn through the morning haze. I had spent 30 years being the emotional and financial scaffolding for people who didn't even like the building. Now, the scaffolding was gone, and I was curious to see if they could stand on their own. Looking back, I realized that the person I was trying to save all those years wasn't my mother or my sister. It was the version of myself that believed I needed their permission to be whole. Before the taxi pulled away, I had one final professional duty to perform. I used my laptop to execute a legal notice of restitution through a secure administrative portal. I wasn't stealing, I was rectifying. I directed the offshore funds Shannon had tried to hide to be channeled back into the family firm's pension fund, and to settle my own medical debts. I adhered strictly to U.S. fiduciary law, ensuring every cent was accounted for and that I remained beyond legal reproach. My intelligence had always been my greatest shield, and today it was my sword. In a moment of quiet grace, I also set aside a small, anonymous trust fund for my niece, Madison. She shouldn't have to pay for the sins of a mother who forgot how to love. "You okay, Sierra?" Arthur asked, his hand resting briefly on the back of my wheelchair before I transferred to the taxi. I looked at him, the man who had given me broth and hope when my own father offered me a legal trap. I gave him a genuine smile, a warm, steady expression that reached my eyes. "I'm more than okay, Arthur. I'm free." I shook his hand, a firm, lingering grip that acknowledged the anchor of hope he had been during my darkest hours. We all pretend to be strong until the right pain finds us. But sometimes, that pain is exactly what we need to see who we really are. I stepped into the waiting taxi, the physical pull of my incision a reminder of the price I had paid for this moment. I took my old phone, the one filled with Shannon's venomous live stream, Laurie's demands for cake, and Haddon's desperate threats, and I looked at it for one last time. It was a black mirror reflecting a life I no longer recognized. As we passed a sidewalk recycling bin, I rolled down the window and dropped it in. I watched it disappear into the metal depths, effectively erasing my old identity as the family servant. That version of me was dead. This version of me was breathing. "Where to, ma'am?" the driver asked, looking at me through the rearview mirror. I gave him the address of a small, quiet coastal town 3 states away where I had rented a cottage under my grandmother's maiden name. A place where the only thing people would know about me was my strength. "Just drive," I said, leaning back into the seat and feeling the sharp, clean air fill my new lungs. The silence in the car wasn't empty. It was full of the future. I wasn't running away. I was arriving. I know many of you watching this have faced a moment where you had to choose between a toxic past and an unknown future. I know the fear that comes with realizing the people who should love you the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. Have you ever had to walk away to find yourself? Have you ever had to be the villain in someone else's story, just to be the hero in your own? Tell me your story in the comments. I read every one, because I know that sometimes hearing that someone else survived the fire is the only thing that keeps you from letting it consume you. As the Chicago skyline faded into the distance, I felt the rhythmic, steady beat of my heart. It was a strong, independent pulse. It didn't belong to Laurie. It didn't belong to Shannon. It belonged to me. The door closing wasn't the end. It was so I could hear my own voice more clearly.